Hello, welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the Bustin family of podcasts. We've got an excellent podcast for you as we're going to be joined here in both segments by our good friend Tristan Freeman. He's doing such great work over at Bustin Brackets, taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. Also does great work over at the Field of 68. I know that he's doing a little bit of work moonlighting over at Sleepers Media as well. We have to talk with him about the just NBA draft decisions that we saw over the last few weeks, the fact that we've got so much talent returning to college basketball, the off seasons for the SEC and the Big East with them having really good off seasons in my opinion, but he's also based out there in the city of Pittsburgh. So how about if we focus on a pair of conferences that I haven't talked a heck of a lot of this off season. We're going to dive in on the Atlantic 10 with Duquesne being out there in Pittsburgh. We're going to talk about Robert Morris being out there in the Rising League. That'll be more towards the back half of the conversation as I'm looking to break down all these teams because as you know, I do every off season my conference previews for every single conference, and we have gotten those started up. The America East is up in the next few days. I plan on doing the Atlantic Sun. I do plan on doing the Big Sky as well. Those should be up within the next 7 days as well, so a little bit of a nice checkup there and a little bit of an update on that front. If you do like hearing, by the way, on this podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, do have one or two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters CM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is via an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated from there. You're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And of course, I do beg with you, I do plead with you, please do send in those Twitter/X questions. Helps me know what you want to hear about in the off season. Then once we get into season, you'll get the picks and analysis on every single game, every single day, but we've got a long ways away to go until then. So let me know what I can do to be able to get you best set for the upcoming season. And I think one thing that I can do, continue to get great guests aboard. Tristan, he is certainly one of them. As I laid out just a minute ago, doing great work over at Sleepers Media, Bustin Brackets, Field of 68, and so much more. You're able to follow him on the old Twitter/X at Oops351 all together. And Tristan, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Greg. Appreciate it.
Tristan, it has been a wild last few weeks in college basketball, and even though it happened darn near 2 weeks ago, really the big thing that happened in the sport recently is the NBA draft decisions, and what were your thoughts on some of them? Because I feel like it's what we've seen over the last few seasons where a lot of these fringe guys that might have been late first, early second round picks, rather than roll the dice on the NBA draft, felt like they all decided that they were going to come back to school.
Yeah, I mean, financially speaking, you know, a lot of them made more money by coming back. I mean, you have guys like Tuna Yesufu reportedly getting $5-6 million, and that's something he probably wouldn't have gotten had he been one of the last two key decisions. So, yeah, I mean, for transfers in particular who have other options, if the market is going to be that expensive for you, then yeah, unless you're a guaranteed top 20 pick, you should definitely return.
Yep, and I do think that when you mentioned Yesufu, he and Milan Memisevic, they were the two most impactful guys because we know that with Yesufu heading on over to St. John's, felt like they were one piece away. Kentucky, boy, oh boy, did they need that star guy, and they get it with Milan. And just how do you take a look at those two teams now? Because I felt like for Kentucky, they had all the role players in the world, but nobody to really bring it together. And now for St. John's, they get a guy in Yesufu, I just think is a textbook perfect fit in their system.
St. John's really needed a wing scorer. They have Donnie Freeman, bring in Quinn Ellis, who's like, I think everyone's viewed top international guard, and you bring back Ian Jackson, but you definitely needed that guy who can get a bucket anytime. And that's what Yesufu did. Even without being a prolific three-point shooter, he still was someone that could give you almost 20 on any given night. And that's what St. John's needed more than anything. So as good of a pickup as possible. And look, and we also seen St. John's can win without having great shooting, you know, in the past couple of years. So yeah, I think Yesufu is a perfect fit for Pitino, and he gets a go-to guy, something that they've been sorely missing for the past couple of months in the offseason.
Yep, no question about it, as we do have Tristan Freeman, who does such great work over at Bustin Brackets, joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, and I've talked about this the last few weeks on the podcast, and I want to get your thoughts as well, because when it comes to best conferences in all of college basketball, I don't think we're putting the Big East in front of like the Big Ten, the SEC, or anything like that right now, but if I were to grade the most improved conferences in the offseason, I would have to put the Big East number one with everything that they've done here in the offseason, because obviously we just talked about St. John's picking up Yesufu. That was much needed for them. You UConn was just going to continue to be UConn even with Solo Ball going out with an injury. I like the way that they have put together their roster, but these schools like a Marquette finally utilizing the transfer portal, all the moves that Providence made, all the moves that Xavier, DePaul made, I really feel like that bottom/middle of the Big East from a season ago is much improved, and I really like the offseason the conference as a whole has had.
Yeah, well, I mean, they certainly get a great grade this offseason, but it's also considering they basically came off a D-plus performance collectively. And only 3 teams were even above 500 overall last year. So, yeah, I mean, coaching changes that happened with Providence was going to boost them. Paul bringing back key players and that notable guys, and then teams like Xavier, Marquette getting active in the portal. So there's nowhere to go but up for the Big East, but outside of, I would say, Butler, Georgetown, and DePaul, I think everyone else has a roster, maybe even DePaul, that could be tournament worthy. And that's all you can ask for in the preseason coming off of how bad things went overall a year ago.
Yep, I'm right there with you. I think that there have been a lot of improved teams out there. And when you bring in someone like a Mugun Gwath as DePaul, like, man, that really shows the commitment to spending for this entire conference. And I think that that's going to be big for them. And then when we do take a look at the SEC without Kentucky deciding to spend, obviously, we have no idea what LSU is going to be looking like right now. If they get all their guys eligible, man, that could be a really good roster, but I don't think that they're going to get all their guys eligible. But I take a look at the SEC as a whole, just trying to recapture the magic that they had 2 seasons ago, because it feels like, once again, top to bottom, even a team like a South Carolina, for example, they made some solid moves in the offseason, and I think that this could be a conference that maybe they don't quite duplicate what they did 2 seasons ago, but it feels like they're locked and loaded after they had a little bit of a setback last season from that amazing year that they had 2 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, and again, considering that it was an A++ campaign for the SEC 2 years ago, they were obviously going to have a little bit of a setback. But I think depending on how you feel about teams like Ole Miss and Auburn, that they're going to get back into contention. Mississippi State brings back one of the best scorers in the country, in Josh Hubbard, with a new supporting cast. The top teams are still going to be top teams. And honestly, I think, Texas is a team that could be a Final Four contender, Tennessee, Florida, and now I guess with Momcilovic in the addition, like maybe Kentucky too. So the top tier of the SEC is as good as anywhere in the country. But I do think the middle, and it depends on who you want to put in there, like Georgia, Texas A&M, and so on, and Oklahoma too. I think those groups will improve overall compared to last year.
Yep, I'm right there with you. And in terms of taking a look at the hierarchy of that conference, I think that it's interesting to slot in there Kentucky, because prior to Milan heading on over to Kentucky, I thought that they were doomed to be in the bottom half of the SEC, and I don't think that there's any way that you could put them in front of like a Florida, Tennessee. Absolutely love the moves that they've made here in the offseason, but I think that they've restored order in terms of being like a number 5, number 6 team in the SEC. Want to get your thoughts there, because I think that they have been able to restore themselves in the upper half of the SEC, but obviously probably not quite on par with a team like a Florida.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you have one of the best shooters, you have the best shooter in the country, Momcilovic, joining you, but there's still questions elsewhere. I think Malachi Moreno can have a sophomore leap, but he also may just be solid and probably someone whose draft stock and measurables are different from what his college game is. But, the backcourt of Zoom Diallo and Alex Wilkins could be really interesting, but there also could be flaws, because is Zoom a true point guard and he's someone who doesn't shoot the ball, and Wilkins moved up to the mid-major level. If the backcourt's not good, then it doesn't really matter how good Momcilovic is, because he played with one of the best point guards in the country, in Taman Lipsey, who certainly made things easier for him. That's going to be an adjustment as well, because point guard play is going to be different for Kentucky. And I think that's going to be a key storyline to watch and determine if they're, not only a top 5, 6 team in the SEC, but a possible, because that would mean that they're probably a top 5, 6 seed in the tournament next year, which would be a slight improvement, but will that be enough to keep Mark Pope's job?
Yep, I think that is so well said by you, and certainly the hot seat is there for Mark Pope, because for Kentucky, They are always spending a whole heck of a lot of money out there in SEC country, as we do have Tristan Freeman, does such great work over at Bustin Brackets, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, and under the radar because we've talked a lot about the NBA draft decisions. Obviously, LSU over the last month or so, they've captured the attention of so many out there in college basketball. I feel like it's been an interesting season for the Atlantic 10. And I want to talk about that on the flip side with Tristan because he does a great job covering all things out there in the city of Pittsburgh. So we'll talk about Duquesne, the Atlantic 10, and then dive it on some Horizon League action with Robert Morris and company. That's on the flip side right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now a part of the Bustin Family Podcast. Side edge this college basketball season? Well, VSiN experts use CBB Analytics, the most comprehensive college basketball analytics platform in the world. See injury impact, on and off data, clutch time performance metrics, first versus second half splits, and so much more. Utilize the promo code of VSiN, that is VSIN, to get $30 off and find your betting edge over at cbbanalytics.com. That is cbbanalytics, all one word.com. For anyone that is new to VSiN, well, I wish you a friendly hello. This is an attention to anyone that is new to VSiN because you're able to get some free stuff with our daily newsletter. It's a great way to catch up on everything that's happening in the sports betting world. It's delivered straight to your inbox every single morning. VSiN's newsletter offers picks, data, strategies for the day's betting menu, and so much more. Sign up for free today over at VSiN.com/newsletter. That's VSIN.com/newsletter, and start receiving your free newsletter tomorrow morning. That is VSIN.com/newsletter. Stay ahead of the game and bet smarter with VSiN. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always great to be joined by Tristan Freeman. Does such great work over at Bustin Brackets, Field of 68, Sleepers Media, and so much more. He's on Twitter at HoopsNut351. And Tristan, in the last segment, we talked about the NBA draft decisions, the big boys in the Big East, along with the SEC. How about if we go to your neck of the woods, though, and take a look at a few teams out there in the city of Pittsburgh? I feel like lost in the NBA draft decisions, lost in all the hoopla of LSU, what have you, over the last few weeks, has been the Atlantic 10 in their offseason. A conference that I'm sure that they would love to be able to get one of those extra bids to the NCAA tournament with the field expanding. And I want to get your thoughts here on the Atlantic 10 because certainly I think that VCU is going to be right back up there at the top. I think that Dayton has actually had a really good offseason as well with adding in there some nice, shall we say, middle tier players. Not quite guys that are good enough to cut it at necessarily a Power 5 conference school, but I mean a couple low it. They have added some really, really nice pieces there. And I do think that for the Atlantic 10, certainly it's going to be running through VCU, but I think that it's going to be very, very stacked with regards to having a school like a St. Louis being right back there. Once again, I'm interested in the Georges, George Washington, George Mason, and a school like a Fordham has been much more respectable ever since Mike Magpio got there.
Yeah, I do think that there's a clear top four if you include, obviously VCU and St. Louis along with Dayton and George Mason, just off of, how consistent they've been in terms of skin era. But yeah, I think Fordham returning their entire front court and adding a pair of quality scoring transfer guards should have them in contention. St. Joe's brings back one of the best guards in the conference and Glover and Jaden Glover Castano. So those teams are going to be in the mix too. And then you just have to assume Loyola Chicago, who either is in the top or bottom of the A10, that with a revamped roster and some urgency, that they're probably going to find their way to get back to the top tier as well. So I do think the A10 is in a strong position, especially at the top teams. I do wonder how the bottom half is looking because based on some of the roster projections, there's some shakiness. But overall, definitely should be a top-heavy league for the A10 next year, assuming, a lot of these newcomers with expectations work out.
Yep, and I think that it's going to be interesting to see what some of those middle-tier teams are going to be able to do because I feel like there's some question marks with Richmond. I know that you're out there in Pittsburgh. You do a great job of taking a look at the Duquesne Dukes, and they had a very big change of style from where they were in year number one under Coach Joyner. They were always a very slow, controlled team. Year number one, they were playing to that style. Last year, they really cranked it up, so I'm very curious to see what happens there. And they added some interesting pieces like an Ejay Demir, who comes over from Oregon, Isaiah Pasha, who is over at Virginia Tech, and I think that that's a team that is going to be a very much fascination because a lot of teams out there in the Atlantic 10, they either go super duper fast, super duper slow. You don't necessarily necessarily have a lot of in between. And for Duquesne, they've really varied their style over the last 2 years.
Yeah, I think on paper, the Kings a team that I have in the bottom four because there's just not a ton of proven production. Even the two guys who did post up stats, Josh Smith and Yo Berman, were good but not great players at the ASUN level. But as you mentioned, Ege Demir, showed some flashes when getting minutes at Oregon. You also bring in a transfer from Creighton who averaged, 10 minutes a game, but he showed flashes as well. And then Pasha, who's a former CAA Rookie of the Year, didn't do anything at Virginia Tech, but he's someone who could be a really good player. So Duquesne might be a team with a very low floor, but could have a sneaky high ceiling if some of these players work out, because they are going to be looking at guys who didn't produce much of their previous stops, but could be breakout contenders.
Yep, no question about it. I think that is going to be a really interesting team, and I do think that there's a little bit of upside there. And then with you also being out there in Pittsburgh, I know you're doing a great job looking at Robert Morris and the Horizon League as well, and that's a conference that I don't feel like gets the love that it deserves. Obviously, Robert Morris has been able to rise up a little bit more over the last few seasons, and just how do you take a look at them and what they've been able to do here in the offseason? Because the Horizon League is not going to get the flash that necessarily a lot of these other conferences are, but I look at them bringing in someone like a Casey Ugakazi. He was a really nice shot blocker over at Merrimack. Ace Valentine was a point guard for a team that made the NCAA tournament in UMBC. I think that Robert Morris has a chance to be right back up there towards the top of the Horizon League.
They bring back their entire freshman class from last year, including Darius Livingston, who was a big, not nice surprise as point guard. Tazir Smith, who started for them, is also back. Even though they lost all their top players, they still have some really good young breakout stars. And as you mentioned, Uga Kazi was a defensive player of the year in the MAC, now Metro. So, RMUs, whose defense has been at the top of the league in the past couple of years, should remain that way. And obviously, Andy Toole is one of the best coaches in the league. So the familiarity combined with the solid additions to sort of build out the depth, I think RMU is going to be a preseason contender in the Horizon League, a conference that hasn't gotten a lot of big names from the portal this offseason compared to a year ago. So that could give them an advantage because a lot of these other teams are sort of going after what will be viewed as lottery tickets from the JUCO or D2 level, or in international now too.
Yep, Oakland has certainly been one of those teams over the last few seasons that they have went very hard in the junior college ranks, being able to look at some of those guys to be able to provide a little bit of promise. Do like the fact that UW Green Bay brings back a few guys from a season ago as well. And do you think that this could be a conference that just has a lot of parity in general? Because for Robert Morris, if I had to power rank it right now, I would have them towards the top of the conference, but Wright State was able to really rise up last season. Youngstown State loses a lot from a season ago, but they've been able to fortify themselves as a team that's typically towards the top of the conference, and I think that this is one of those classic mid-major conferences where you could see every single team in the conference lose 4+ games when it comes to conference play.
Don't forget, Detroit was a team who a couple of years ago won just one game and then was minutes away from representing the conference in title game, and even though they have a postseason ban for next year, they still bring back a lot of talent as well. And this has been a conference that, everyone has either been at the very top or at the very bottom, the exception of IU Indy. Then you assuming Northern Illinois takes its bumps, it's going to be another interesting year where you can argue anyone could be competitive, because Youngstown State had a down year for the first time in a while. You should expect them to come back. Oakland, as long as Grant can't be around, can't be discounted. And Milwaukee had a ton of injuries, but they bring back some key players too. So I think it'll be another year where there's no dominant team and there's probably 7 or 8 title contenders. And, whoever can avoid the injury bug will be in contention.
Yep, I'm right there with you. I think that it's going to be a lot of fun, the Horizon League this year, and I know that you, Tristan, are just doing an amazing job gauging this game of college basketball in general. You're locked in on all the teams out there in the Pittsburgh area, but you do a great job with everything college basketball, from the mid-majors to high majors. You're over there at Bustin Brackets, Field of 68, Sleepers Media, and so much more, so love to give people at home. Know what's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, you can follow me at Hoopsnut351 on Twitter/X. You can also follow my work at Bustin Brackets, Hoops HQ, and every now Tuesday for the Field 68 deal.
Absolutely, and Tristan, he's doing such excellent work taking a look at this great sport of college basketball. Every single time he joins me, he lends such great insights, and did so once again today. So, big thanks to Tristan for joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one or two ways we'll fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, there's the name does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. The conference preview podcasts are back. We're going to be doing the Atlantic Sun here within the next, I would say, 48 to 72 hours, so be on the lookout there, and we're going to do one of those for all 32 conferences. I'm looking to just try to get you guys as best prepared for this upcoming college basketball season as humanly possible to make it the best ever. And then once we get back in season, picks and analysis on every single game, every single day. So appreciate you tuning in today, and I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.